in the graphic novel, you mentioned there's 5 stories that you've told, and 4 new ones. Out of those 5 that have been told, what's your favorite one out of them, or one that you'd like to give us one more?
So I'll give you an abbreviated version of one, just because it's my favorite story, although it would take me about 45 minutes to tell.
Yeah.
I'll give you the high level. So it's called the Headless Valley. And so I'll just give you the context of this place. So this is like just geographical information here. So in Canada, there is a section. Aren't you from Canada?
Yeah, I'm from Winnipeg, Perfect. Canada. Yeah.
Okay, so the Northwest Territories, this rugged expanse in Canada. For those that don't know, there's this section of Canada called the Northwest Territories. And it's just this massive swath of land. It's forested, it's wild, and it's about the same size as Germany, which has something like 50 million people living there. But by contrast, the Northwest Territories is home to 50,000 people. So it's this massive area. Almost barren. Nobody lives there. And within the Northwest Territories is one particularly isolated spot called the Nahanni Valley. And it's just this huge valley with a bunch of rivers stemming through it. And it's one of the very few places on Earth that is virtually untouched by man. And it's because it's nearly impossible to get to it, at least through normal means. You can't fly a plane there. You can't take a boat there, despite there being rivers. In fact, you can technically, but you'd have to take your boat upstream, disassemble it, carry it up a waterfall, go again, disassemble it. Like it's totally impractical. And so the only ways to get into the Nahanni Valley is by very dangerous, rugged overland hike, or actually literally taking a boat. And there's a video of a guy doing this back in the 50s, I think it was, where you got to go upstream, disassemble it, carry the pieces up a waterfall, do it over and over again. Jeez. But if you can get into this valley, though, I mean, it's pristine nature, pristine wildlife, and really nobody's been there. And it's huge. It's beautiful. But over the course of what I document in this story, which originally was covered on YouTube, and then we converted it to the graphic novel, starting in, I think it was like the late 1800s through, I want to say 1950s or 60s, there were all these people that went into the valley, that kind of found a way into the valley. Most just hiked their way in, many of which were gold prospectors, because, I mean, this is an area that's untouched, which means that there's gold there. And the anecdotal stories of what happened to these people are horrifying. And it's how the Nahanni Valley was renamed the Headless Valley, because basically people began going into this valley, not coming out again. Rescue party goes in and finds the people missing their heads, but not like there was no sign of a struggle. It's like one guy was sitting by a campfire that had long been extinguished, and he still had a match in his hand and a cigarette in the other. It was almost like he'd been flash frozen, but he was missing his head. You know, like stories like that come out of this valley with some regularity. And then the way the story wraps up, after I kind of take you through this chronology of all these individual little anecdotes about these gold prospectors losing their heads, you get to the final story, which is this hunting party goes into the Nahanni Valley. This is probably in the 1940s, 50s, I forget which, but it's sometime in the 1900s. And there's an account of what somebody sees. So before, it's all finding their bodies and they're missing their heads, but there's finally this account of somebody seeing something. So this hunting party, when they went in, a woman had gone missing in the valley and had not been discovered yet. Her name was Annie. And this hunting party is along it's called the Flat River. Ironically, it's anything but. It's a raging rapid. It's one of the most dangerous places to take your boat, probably in the country. So they're right on the banks of the Flat River where they're making camp. And this guy wakes up, and he wakes up to the sound of what sounds like rocks falling into this churning water that's not too far away. And he gets out and he looks, there's moonlight cast down on him, and he sees pretty far away, like 100 yards away from him, is this naked woman who's running on all fours up the side of this like, it's the side of, it's the side leading into the water. It's like almost a cliff, if you will, from the cliff, it goes straight down to the Flat River, and she's on the edge of this cliff, like scraggling her way up the side, and she's knocking rocks into the water. And he gets out and he looks up at her, and he can't understand what she's doing. And she whips her head around, and he would describe her face as being demonic. Like her eyes are all open and a mess, and her mouth is disjointed. And again, she's nude and she's not with the hunting party. And then she kind of disappears around the corner and pops up on the other side of the river, climbing up the side of this mountain where she disappears. And he would later go on to tell authorities what he saw, and the way he described her physical appearance as best as he could is it's very likely believed to be the missing woman, Annie, who had no signs of mental break before going into the valley, but very likely was seen nude and running amok in the middle of the night in the Headless Valley. So if you're interested, there's lore around that. There was, at one point, there was a tribe known as the Nahanni tribe, who lived in the valley. They're the only people we know that lived there full time. And they have found to have abandoned their settlement almost overnight, and they were never found again. They left all their things and were just gone, like mass, just suddenly gone. And all they were recorded as writing about before the disappearance was the emergence of these white demons that were stalking them at night. They talked about seeing these white demons in the forest, and that was shortly before they all vanished without a trace. And so to this right now, the Nahanni Valley is a public park. It's a big, huge park. But interestingly, there's been segments of the park that have been no one can go into, and it's actually they use the fact that it's a public, it's a national park to say these are off limits areas. But conspiracy theorists say that the reason those are off limits is because those are actually the areas where most of the people who were killed were found, and that there could be something sinister lurking in the wilds of the Nahanni Valley.
It's amazing that you have so many of these stories, like this is just incredible. This goes beyond, alien encounters or Bigfoot. I'm sure you've got those kinds as well, but this is serious Evil Dead type, demonic type things.
Yeah. It also happens to be my real life passion. When I was in the Navy, my nickname was Shakespeare because I wouldn't shut up. I was always just telling stories all the time. That's just what I do. So